Hello, I'm the Dark Master, and welcome back to my video game reviews. In today's video, we shall be once again reviewing a game in the Kirby series, specifically the 18th game in the series overall and the 8th mainline game, Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, or as it's called in Japan, Kirby of the Stars, the Great Labyrinth of the Mirror. This game is the first and so far only game in the series to be a full-on metroidvania, building off the foundation set up in the Great Cave Offensive sub-game of Kirby Superstar, which I have reviewed before if you'd like to learn more. Did it manage to develop this into a solid game, or is there a reason the series never did this again to such an extent? Well, let us start, as we always do, with the developmental history of this game. Alright, so this game was the last whose development coincided with that of the Kirby Right Back at You anime. But it was at the tail end of that period, and sadly, it doesn't have much of anything that's in line with the anime. Sadly, we don't have a lot of info on the development of this game compared to some of the others I've talked about. It was made in collaboration of HAL Laboratory Flagship Co. Ltd., which was a Japanese video game developer known for working on various games like Resident Evil 2, Onimusha Warlords, Legend of Zelda, The Minish Cap, etc., etc. The third developer involved was DIMPS Corporation, which is best known for developing various handheld Sonic games. It seems to go smoothly, but a lot of graphics were left on the cutting room floor, as they say, with an unused enemy called Stoppy that looked like a stopwatch being notable. In the end, the game was released in Japan on April 15, 2004, then in Europe on July 2, 2004, North America in October 18, 2004, and Australia on December 23, 2004, and sold fairly well, with 1.47 million copies worldwide sold. And now that we've finished up this sort of pre-release stuff, let us now go on to cover the game itself, starting with the story, which is a bit more ambitious and substantive this time around. Alright, so the story begins in the sky above Dreamland, where it is revealed that there is this mirror world, magical dimension that uses to be a peaceful realm known for the many mirrors used to travel within it. However, a sinister evil seems to have suddenly appeared and impacted the area as the mirrors start to show evil reflections. Meta Knight decides to investigate this, but disappears. Meanwhile, unaware of all of this, Kirby is minding his own business, walking down the area, when suddenly he is attacked by some sort of shadowy figure that looks a lot like Meta Knight, but darker, who splits the poor guy into 4 individuals. Why he doesn't just kill the guy is beyond me, but he then flies away. After recollecting themselves, the 4 Kirbys give chase on their warp stars into the mirror. The group of Kirbys follow the mysterious knight, who looks like Meta Knight but darker, to a hub area that, serves as the main area for the place, where we see the shadowy knight beating Meta Knight, banishing the poor guy into a mirror before shattering the mirror into 8 pieces that are then scattered across the land. We then see the shadowy, sort of black colored Kirby guy go sulking away in a nearby mirror, and from there they set off the main quest to get all those shards, which are guarded by a set of individuals that may be under the control of this dark influence. These include the Columnal King Golem, the Large Mole Moly, the Returning Krakow, the Mechanical Knight Mega Titan, the Shark Gobbler, Wiz the Grand Wizard, and Master Hand and Crazy Hand from Super Smash Bros. For some reason. I guess they just got lost or something. We also see Meta Knight apparently attacking Kirby at one point, guarding a shard, but I don't know why he's doing this. In reality, this is the dark figure that looks like Meta Knight but is darker. And you can tell as he doesn't give Kirby a sword pre-battle, which shows he doesn't have the honor of the true Meta Knight. You also encounter that shadowy Kirby who will either attack you on occasion, just to be a prick, but will give you items as well, so he's just kind of a mixed bag. After collecting all the shards, the various Kirbys enter into the mirror to confront the great evil behind all this. They find a twisted, dark version of the Colosseum as they encounter Meta Knight. But then the real Meta Knight shows up and exposes the other as just being a dark reflection, that being the dark Meta Knight, who's like Meta Knight, but darker. Who then begins, attacking Kirby, and he uses a lot of techniques from Meta Knight, but darker. The Kirby beats him, shattering the copycat into glass-like shards as a portal then opens up, which the Kirbys all jump into. Meta Knight tosses his sword in that may or may not be Galaxia and confronts the real mastermind behind all this evil, Dark Mind. The Sorcerer of Evil, who is a mirror world equivalent of Nightmare. After 4 phases, he casts aside his human form and becomes the Eye of Sauron. No, literally, meaning that in canon, Kirby could actually beat Sauron. In the end, Kirby beats this guy, and the day is saved, and it's revealed that the shadowy Kirby was actually the protector of the mirror world, but he didn't really help all that much. The Kirbys leave back to the mainland, as does Meta Knight, who leaves his sword in the pedestal. Overall, I found the story was charming. Sure, it's simple in some aspects, like Shadow Kirby was not all that good, but I mean, it's a Kirby game, and they typically have simple, nice stories. And this was a simple, nice story. Now let's go on to what is arguably the most important aspect of any game, the gameplay. So the basic gameplay is what you'd expect from a Kirby game. The D-pad allows you to go walk or run if pressed twice. You can use the up arrow to enter doors / mirrors, go up or down ladders. The down arrow of the D-pad allows you to crouch. The A button allows you to jump. If you press it multiple times, you can hover in the air or jump in water. If you press the B button, you can inhale, but this game introduces the super inhale, which you use by holding the B button down. The super inhale, allows you to suck real hard and inhale even big chonkers of enemies, except for Gordos and Shotzos for some reason. Once you got an enemy in the mouth, you have several options. Pressing B allows you to spit it out as a star missile. If you press down while something is in your mouth, you can swallow it, potentially getting a comp ability, which can then be used by pressing B. And if underwater, you use the water gun by pressing B. Though some abilities like sword and hammer can be used underwater. And if pressed in the air, B allows you to spit out an air bullet. By pressing the select button, you can drop any ability. We'll return to the abilities in a little bit. Perhaps the most notable basic gameplay addition is the cell phone. By pressing R, you can call up the other Kirbys. Indeed, there are other Kirbys which can't be controlled by up to 3 other players or by the CPU, but bear in mind that the CPUs will just kind of wander around like a hobo doing nothing. So you'll have to beat it all on your own if you're all by yourself. But I do think they do help with bosses, though, so call them when you get to one of those areas. You have a limit of 3 uses, but you can find batteries that will refill your phone, but they can be a little rare. Speaking of items, in addition to the batteries, you got the returning food that fills a little health, energy drinks that fill up to 2 points of health, Maxim tomatoes that are full heal, there's invincibility candies that give temporary invincibility, and 1-ups that give you extra lives. There are a few others, but they're tied to treasure chests, and I want to save that until later when I talk about the completion requirements part of this video. So instead, let us go into the biggest change of this game's gameplay, that being where it takes place. You see in all of the Kirby games, they're your typical 2D linear platformer, but this game instead is a metroidvania. As for what a metroidvania is, you may be wondering. Well, it's this term for a type of game where there's a large interconnected world map that the player can explore, though certain parts are usually inaccessible until you get some upgrades or future gear, items, or abilities. And these in turn, unlock other areas that you might need more abilities to get through at that, but it's basically an exploration genre. The term comes from the first game to utilize this concept, those being Metroid and Castlevania. Some game journalists have been in recent years complaining that it's too specific and limited, not properly describing gameplay, and would rather instead prefer the term unlocking world or search action. I'm going to be honest, I think both those terms are cringe as heck. I mean, unlocking world, what does that even mean? They just sound so sterile / corporate. Plus, who are these people to argue for ethics? Are we supposed to take them seriously? I will be using the term Metroidvania from this and all my future videos going forwards, and I encourage you to do the same, as don't let people rob you of perfectly fine, flavorful terms in favor of more generic corporate ones. But as a Metroidvania, how is Kirby and the Amazing Mirror? Unfortunately, it's not perfect, as it retains some aspects of the Kirby series that don't quite mesh well with the broader Metroidvania idea. For example, there's one-way doors, which admittedly are fine if, in the context of you're entering a boss area, but otherwise, it just makes backtracking so obnoxious at certain points. And at the end of the day, it just doesn't fit right with the concept of a Metroidvania. They're supposed to be interconnected, and when you don't do that, it just feels off. There are also these goal games where Kirby will fly through the air collecting life / health food. For the first time you do it, it can be fun, but honestly, why are these even here? Because you are returned back to the main menu. It just seems like something you would put at once you beat a boss. You wouldn't have them separate. I don't know, that's just kind of weird. There's also certain metal blocks that can only be broken with certain copy abilities, like burning hammer, throw, and UFO. There's cannons with fuses that can be lit with, burning, fire, or bomb. Sticks that can be hammered in by stone hammer and the like. These are all staples that are fine in a regular Kirby game, but here, because you need a specific copy ability, one of which is often not in that particular room in a lot of cases, means you gotta backtrack to get it, or, even worse, you have to know to get it beforehand, which can be just, awful. Making matters worse is that in this game, Kirby loses his ability in one hit, a huge step down from Kirby Superstar, where you normally had to take a few smaller hits or one really big one to lose an ability. These things make it so that what could have been a great Metroidvania and just leave it as a sort of mediocre midway point. But you know what isn't mediocre outside of what I've already discussed? The copy abilities. While Yes, they are back to the mostly single button presses, but I think that is fine, as I can appreciate both approaches to the concept of copy abilities. So now let's explain them for a bit. Starting with the returning ones, they all fire as a flamethrower. You got burning, which sees Kirby fling forward as a fireball, you know, that allows him to, just go through enemies. There is a beam that allows you to use a plasma whip. A bomb allows you to toss bombs that like torches, yet for some reason don't destroy metal blocks. Cutter, which allows you to throw a boomerang. Sword gives you a sword. Hammer gives you a hammer. Stone lets you turn into a rock to crush things. Ice is a freeze thrower. Laser lets you shoot lasers and they can bounce off walls. Wheel lets you turn into a wheel. Tornado lets you spin around like a tornado and destroy anything that gets in your way. Throw lets you throw things. Spark allows you to summon a field of electricity as a shield. Sleep gives you narcolepsy. Crash is a screen nuke. Cook is also a screen nuke, but you get food from it. UFO is back and, as per usual, is extremely OP, though you lose it when you complete an area for some reason. Utterly bizarre. Fighter maintains the complexity seen in Kirby Superstar, as you can Vulcan job, slam punch, rising kick, and spin kick all of the bodily fluids of people's to your heart's content. And actually, the fact that every other ability has lost the complexity means it stands out a lot more here. Parasail gives Kirby a parasail. More interesting, though, is all the new abilities, even if they're not all astounding. Weakest is Mini, which shrinks Kirby into a micro version of himself, letting him go into smaller places, which is a staple ability in Metroidvanias and does sound cool, but you are unable to attack or hover, so bleh. It's pretty utilitarian. And aside from getting some goodies, it's probably best to avoid this one. The magic is another screen nuke, but one with a gimmick. It summons a roulette from which one of the few events can occur. Cherry turns all enemies into food. 1-Ups has all of them turn into 1-Ups. Candy gives him temporary invulnerability. Sword has Meta Knight swoop in and kill everyone. I don't know how he does that if he's supposedly trapped somewhere, but... And the question mark gives a random ability. Overall, it's a fun, if admittedly limited ability. Cupid gives Kirby a pair of wings and a bow, which can be charged to pierce enemies. Again, fun, but a bit limited and stiff at points. Missile sees Kirby become a rocket, which he then Leroy Jenkins into an enemy, killing it. Honestly, very fun. But the best standard new ability has to be Smash. Yes, a copy ability that mimics the moveset Kirby has in Super Smash Bros. By pressing B, you can do Vulcan jabs. Moving while pressing B has you swing a hammer. Final Cutter can be done by pressing up and B. Pressing B in the air lets you do a twinkling star. Dashing while pressing B in midair leads to a hammer spin. And lastly, down and B turns into a rock. It's so fun to play with. And plus, you can pretty much get through all of the, unlockable stuff, except it can't light fuses, so you'll have to abandon it in those cases, but it's honestly really fun. Of course, the absolute best ability would be Master. No, not the Master Sword, but just Master. It may well be a reference to the Master Sword from Legend of Zelda, though kinda odd they didn't give it the name Galaxia, as the anime influence, I guess, had just really petered out at this point, which is kinda unusual. It is not only helpful in the final boss, but can be used in the post-game to collect everything that doesn't require a mini Kirby. Overall, the abilities are the most part really fun here to utilize, even if some are not all that amazing. Moving on from the main game, we see a quadrilogy of sub-games. First, you got Boss Endurance, which is, self-explanatory. You gotta beat all the bosses in one health bar. Use stone if you're having problems. Then you got Speed Eaters, where you have to press A right on time to inhale the apples. But you also got to be careful, as if you don't do it right, you could potentially inhale bombs, which will knock you out for a bit. The first to get a full stomach wins. Third, you got Crockety Hack, which is sorta like a Megatron punch, but with 4 Kirbys. You gotta time 4 bar meters. Whoever times it best wins. Last but not least, we got Kirby Wave Ride, where using properly timed presses of the A button to do jumps in a wave, but you can't do too much, otherwise you'll slow down. So you can't spam. You gotta time it. It is a fine and a bit fun game if you got other people, but nothing special if you're doing single player. And it may have been a reference to the earlier Kirby's Air Ride game, which I've reviewed in the past if you'd like to learn more. All 3 of these sub games, except for, obviously the boss rush, have 3 challenge levels. Overall, the gameplay of the game is fine, but does have some issues due to them really trying to do both a metroidvania and a traditional Kirby game. Really, they should have doubled down on one or the other. Now let's go on to the presentation, starting with the most obvious aspect of it, the graphics. Alright, so the basic graphics used are from Kirby's Nightmare Dreamland, which I've reviewed before if you'd like to learn more about that as a basis. But given the more unusual setting, I do think it looks actually better, as it's more visually innovative and they leave a lot more impact on me, with each having a distinct feeling plus really beautiful backgrounds. The Mirror World is just a really wild place with a lot more forests than the base area of Dreamland. First one we see is the Rainbow Route, which is a cloudy heavenly place that serves mostly as a central hub. It has no boss or shard, but it is neat. It gives off sort of an inviting feeling. Then you got Moonlight Mansion, which is this really creepy house set in a dark forest. Really gives off a sort of Luigi's Mansion / maybe Resident Evil vibe from a sort of 1950s / 1940s aesthetic. It's honestly kind of a very interesting concept for a first world in the context of Kirby. Next, you got Cabbage Caverns, which are these large caves with just gem-filled backgrounds that really sparkle with delight. Mustard Mountains is, true to its name, a hilly place that has a lot of lava that can burn you. It's also very linear, which is honestly pretty bad because, the one-way door issue I talked about earlier. Carrot Castle is the most complex of the areas, which makes sense as it is taking place in a regal castle filled with elaborate details. It sort of gives us a unique sense, like it was made by some ancient civilization but was recolonized at some later point. Olive Ocean is a typical tropical region with multiple tropical islands and deep oceanic flooded tunnels that give very nice contrast. Radish Ruins takes place in an ancient ruin setting in a desert region. It really does give the Mirror World a real sense of age as a creature-filled relic from a time long gone. Peppermint Palace is a cool place, has ice physics, which is not all that cool, and it has a huge castle made out of ice. Doesn't sound like a good place to live, but it is absolutely beautiful to explore. Candy Constellation is a space level with isolated plateaus of archaic machinery, with a beautiful background and all sorts of strange things like floating cubes of water and electric currents that are hazards that give just a very old Space Tales type of vibe. The Dimensional Mirror is a little more than a small region to face the final boss, and it's dark, I guess. Gives a sort of haunted feeling. This game has a lot of really neat little visual details. For example, there are spray paints which can alter the color and can be found in certain chests. My favorite has to be chalk that turns them into sort of a Game Boy-esque color scheme, and the red impacts the fighter ability as the red bandana turns white. Now let's go on to the second half of the presentation, the music, and see if that has aged well. Alright, so this game soundtrack is composed of both new and returning music. The intro music is really chipper and gives off the feeling of some Disney TV shows that aired on Saturday mornings. The music track that plays in the first cutscene of the game is very mystical, as it seems like you're entering some sort of ancient tale. All the menus seem fine, if a bit utilitarian in terms of music. The song heard in the first stage gets you pumped up and would return in Kirby Star Allies and most recently Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. The Force theme heard mostly in Rainbow Route really is triumphant thanks to the 4x4 beat and being in F sharp or G flat. It is more famously used in the next game though, Kirby Squeak Squad. Then you got the castle slash building area theme that is sort of a Vegetable Valley vibe, but is unique due to the cowbell like instruments that play in the background towards the end. It was sadly never returned to, which is a shame, as I think it's really good and is mostly heard in Moonlight Mansion and Carrot Castle. Going on to the Cabbage Canyon, we hear a slow paced remix of Kirby's forced stage theme from Kirby's Adventure that I've reviewed before. I like the slower take on it, and it honestly sounds really good. The lava theme is sort of volcanic in mood. The deep sea theme is rather uplifting despite the visual context it plays in. The ice theme is another one that is, never returned, but I think it really hits differently and reminds me of the Christmas sort of music you hear sometimes. The Ruins theme heard in Radish Ruins also did not return until Kirby and the Rainbow Curse. It gives off a really sort of Arabian vibe thanks to the marching and orchestral tone of the track, and the space theme does sound like something you'd hear in space. Going to the more dynamic themes, the mid-boss theme returns from Nightmare in Dreamland and sounds just as perfect for fighting a mini-boss here as it did there. The boss theme is much more unique as it has an agitated theme and really sticks out. No idea why it was the theme for the first phase of the final boss though, didn't really fit. Before we get to him, let us discuss the theme of Meta Knight, or should I say Dark Meta Knight, because he's like Meta Knight but darker. And honestly, this has a really Spanish vibe to it, sort of like the base Meta Knight, except, darker. And it honestly does sound great. The theme of the final boss is his second and third form, though. Man, it's the best in the game, and really does feel like you're fighting Sauron himself. Overall, the music of this game is pretty solid. Now let us cover the many foes that Kirby will face on this mirrored adventure. Alright, so starting with the old returning classics in terms of the copyability-less enemies, you got Waddle Dees, who also come in a giant variant in this game that takes time to suck up but is otherwise identically pathetic. Then there is Shatso the Cannon, Gordo, Galunk the Anemone, Blipper the Fish, Squishy the Squid, and Bronto Burt. In terms of new faces, in terms of these guys, you got Shadow Kirby, who I talked about earlier, Droppy, who is a yellow rotund thing that can steal a copy ability and turn into a pink variant of the enemy, with the exception of Magic, Hammer, Master, and Throw. In that case, he'll just turn red and run around, and you gotta re-inhale it to regain the lost ability. Shame this never came back, as it was a very interesting concept, I think, for an enemy. Then there is Batty the Bat, Roly-Poly, a blue guy who rolls down slopes, Chip, a yellow fox-tailed blob that hops around, Haley the Hedgehog, which is an allusion to Sonic, Jack, who, takes up space in cannons until you kill him or send the poor loser flying. The name is a reference to how he hijacks. It's a neat concept, but never came back. There is Cap, who is an angel with lips. Mira pretends to be a mirror. Shooty, who is a small aeroplane that floats at Kirby. There is Snooker, who is a stubby green guy that'll try and eat Kirby. Blockin tries to pretend to be a star block and can't be inhaled. Last and not least, you have this guy named Prank, who is this purple imp thing that will, true to its name, pull various attacks, including throwing a frying pan that can, in certain situations, give cook. There's a fireball that can give fire, a black bomb that gives bomb, and an ice block. I'd normally include an enemy that gives copy abilities in the copy ability section, but if you inhale Imp himself, he doesn't give any, so I think it still counts. There's another prank that he will do where he will paint Kirby's face purple, which stuns him for a bit as he cleans himself. And the final prank has him toss a banana peel, which Kirby will trip on and lose their ability. Last and not least, we got Soror. Overall, I think that these common enemies are all kind of cool, and a lot of them have really interesting ideas. But now let's go on to the common enemies that have abilities, as there's a little more to talk about there. There are returning ones like Flamer that gives burning, Bomber that gives crash, Rocky that gives stone, Hothead that gives fire, Laserball gives laser, Noddy gives sleep, Pingy the penguin gives ice, the Paracel gives paracel, Sir Kibble gives cutter, Sparky gives spark, Sword Knight gives well sword, and then there is Twister that gives tornado. There's UFO that gives the UFO ability, Waddle Doo gives beam, and Wheelie that gives wheel. In addition, there are several interesting new guys. Foley is a floating seed pod that gives bomb and will return regularly in the series. Cupid is an angel that shoots, angel arrows and gives the Cupid ability. Cookin is a cook that gives cook and throws its frying pan at Kirby. Interestingly, this is the only time that a common enemy is given cook. There's Giant Rocky, which is an obese variation of Rocky that is just huge and requires a super inhale. There's Heavy Knight is a huge knight that just looks awesome. I kind of wish he'd return and gives the sword ability. Same thing with the Metal Guardian, that is a large robotic thing that gives laser. Mini is the sort of Waddle Dee that is really small and gives the mini ability. Then there is Bong Bang, a rocket that gives missile. Last but not least, we got Golem. This big stone creature named after a figure in a Jewish mythology comes in 3 color morphs that each give a different ability and have a different attack. Gray gives fighter and will try to uppercut Kirby. Yellow tries to roll into Kirby and gives wheel, and reddish variant gives rock and will try and slam down on him. Honestly, I think that the copy ability bearing enemies are kind of cool. I mean, there are some weak ones, but I think most of the new ones are really great additions that sadly never really became staples in the series. Oh, and there's also Boxin, who is this mole like creature that gives fighting, but he's okay. I kind of almost forgot about him because he's not really all that interesting. But now let us go up a level and discuss the mini bosses. Starting with the returning ones, you got Fan Fan the Elephant, Mr. Frosty, who now has a new weakness to fire related attacks, and Bonkers. They all come back and they're all ways as neat as they were before, functioning as they did in previous games. Then we got 5 new foes. First is Batafix, a flaming bat that flies at Kirby and releases volleys of fireballs that Kirby can inhale and spit back at him, but due to his flight patterns, can be a little annoying to hit at times. It's honestly an interesting fight. And by the way, Batafire here, he gives burning, pretty obvious, but I figure I should mention that. Box Boxer, who gives fighter, is a huge dog-like creature that will use its ears to punch the heck out of Kirby, and will also fire blasts of energy that can be sucked up and spat back out at him. Boxy is a demonic gift that gives magic and will charge at Kirby and spit out multiple boxes that can either be sucked up to be spat back out at him or allowed to open, which can reveal either food, batteries, or bombs that will give bomb. Bomber is a green airplane that will bombs at Kirby as well as dive bomb at him, and is honestly a pretty fun fight as he's pretty erratic. Obviously, he gives the missile ability, in case you're curious. Last but not least, we got Master Hand. Yes, that guy from Super Smash Brothers. And, he kind of functions as he does in that series. He will either try and grab Kirby, smash him, or fire blasts from his fingers. It's cool, and honestly, the most fun of the mini bosses. And of course, he gives what has to be one of the best abilities in the game, Smash. So, I always love encountering this guy. Let us now go on to the true boss of this game. First, we got King Golem, who is clearly the mirror world equivalent of Wispy Woods, and in terms of gameplay is similar. Occasionally, he will slam his fists on the ground, which causes rocks to fall down on the poor pink puffball. He'll also spit out a golem from his mouth. Not a hard boss, but I like the design here. His mustache is very regal. He's the boss of Moonlight Mansion, and just say it right here, there's no actual order that it's supposed to be done in. I mean, there is a recommended one, but due to being a Metroidvania, I'm going to be talking about it in the order that they're recommended you go through them. And honestly, though, you can go in any order you want. I'm just doing it because it's easier and it flows better. Also, I kind of like how there are cameos of future bosses in the background of this encounter. The boss of Cabbage Caverns is Moley, who is a large mole that will pop out of one of six holes randomly, three in the ground and three in the ceiling. He will toss one of several items that can be either spat back out at him or, in some cases, inhaled for cop abilities. Some, like the screw or small rock, don't give anything, but the big rock gives stone, a tire gives wheel, a spike ball gives cutter, and a fiery steel drum gives burning. It's honestly a fun fight that's really dynamic and gives a really whack-a-mole energy. The boss of Mustard Mountain's crack, however, is not that interesting, though, being the exact same as any other Krakow fight around this time. It's fun, but easy and not really notable. The boss of Carrot Castle, a Mega Titan, is this four-armed mechanical beast. Has two phases. The first one is completely invulnerable, and you have to basically try and push it into the electrified walls while it tries to punch Kirby. And honestly, I think that's a very interesting concept, as oftentimes Kirby doesn't really fight foes, especially bosses that are truly invulnerable. Once you do that four times, its body is destroyed and its head starts floating around firing missiles. Overall, it's a really fun fight, and seeing something that Kirby can't normally hurt, I just think is kind of interesting, though you can technically cheese it by using Beam or Spark, but that's cheating. And it also kind of looks like Meta Knight for some reason. I don't know why. Next up is Gobbler, the boss for all of Ocean. A shark that wears a lifesaver. Seems kind of stupid, though, but it's a fun fight. I think that it's really interesting how it'll try to bite you and leap into the water and shoot out smaller sharks. I mean, it's nothing groundbreaking, but it was definitely an enjoyable encounter. The boss of Peppermint Palace is the Wiz. No, not that one. He's basically the mirror world equivalent of Paint Roller and will pull out his hat, which will then release several items which can either be spat back out at him or ingested for an ability. He got the balloon, football, and Bronto Burt that give nothing, so you should just spit it out at him. There's Droppy, which can be really annoying. There's a poison apples that give sleep. That's a reference to, Snow White. Then there is, a bomb that gives the bomb ability and a, car that gives wheel, as well as a thunder cloud that gives spark. Overall, it's a very enjoyable encounter. By the way, I haven't really mentioned it, but most of these bosses have some level of certain weaknesses to certain elements. But unlike with the mini bosses, with the exception of Mega Titan, it's not really that big of a deal, and I don't really feel the need to discuss it, and I don't think you'll really need to use it at all. The boss of Radish Ruins is unnamed, but is clearly, Dark Meta Knight disguised as the real Meta Knight. And he does serve as the Meta Knight fight for this game, and is very mechanically complex as he can guard from attacks, hover flap, do all sorts of attacks involving his sword, like an overhead slash, triple slash, quick slash, sword spring, and, downward thrust. Rematch against him is the second to last boss, and it's similar, though he has higher defense, is faster and more aggressive. In addition, he has two more powerful attacks now. First is the Crescent Shot, which sees him shoot a purple energy wave from his sword. There are two variants. One has him fire a single, much faster shot, the other is three consecutive ones at Kirby's current location. The second new move is the Tornado Slash, which might be familiar to you, where he will stab the ground, creating a huge tornado, which will then either travel half the screen or the entirety of it. It's impossible to know which one will be, so it's better to try and get behind him in order to dodge it. Overall, he's a fun if challenging fight. Going back to Candy Constellation, you see an encounter against Master and Crazy Hand. Master Hand functions like his mini boss but with more health, but Crazy Hand is very erratic. And they can do a set of team attacks, including the ability to fist bump each other and such. It's plenty fun, and I think that it's a really engaging, dynamic attack. But now let's go to the final boss, Dark Mind, the mirror world equivalent of Nightmare. His first form is a demonic warlock. He technically has four phases. I know I called it the first phase, but it's actually four. But it's complicated. Let's get into it. As really, they're all identical except for the arena they're far around and having more and more attacks. The first one is a flat, rocky area, and it's in this fight, and we see him shooting stars. Red ones give fire. He can also do a horizontal barrage of stars and a star valley. The second phase takes place in a slightly different arena that has two platforms, and Dark Mind can now spin around, himself with a bunch of mirrors and has a homing attack. The second stage also introduces blue stars that give ice, and plus he teleports a lot. The third phase has him fought in an arena with a shallow pool of water, and he will now do fake outs where he'll seemingly appear but actually disappear, horizontal and vertical star spread attacks, as well as bullet stars that now give spark and are colored violet. And lastly, the fourth battle has ice physics. Woo! It also introduces the ability to do a screen nuke, star sweep, and rapid teleportation shots. It honestly sounds like a lot, to be honest, but it's really just the same fight over and over again, just a little different each time. And interestingly, in the boss rush minigame that I talked about earlier, they're combined all into a single encounter, and honestly, I do like this fight, but it does come off as a bit excessive at points. And I get the reason. They wanted to do a phase for each of the four Kirbys, but I feel like they could have distinguished them more. The second phase, though, is just amazing. First, as I said before, it looks like the Eye of Sauron, which is just very intimidating and really sticks out, and it's only aided by the fiery, hellish background. He will spin mirrors around and shoot lasers in various different patterns. It's actually really challenging due to his sheer size and fast movements. The final form is a shooter, which, while not as hard, really does give a dramatic battle finale. Overall, the bosses of the game are memorable in their own ways, but you may have noticed that along the way there was a large penguin-shaped hole, and yeah, deity does not appear in any form whatsoever in this game. The only time in the series that he's never appeared in, if we discount those bad promotional games that I reviewed last time. A very strange exclusion that I kind of don't get, as I feel like a mirrored equivalent of DD could have been cool, but it would be rectified in Kirby's Triple Deluxe release in 2014 for the 3DS, but that is for a later date. Now let us go on to the completion requirements and my final thoughts. Alright, so in terms of completion requirements, it is what you might expect from a metroidvania. Every big switch must be pressed, every area must be explored, and you must beat the final boss. Oh, and also watch the entirety of the credits. But also, one has to open all of the treasure chests, which is a concept that comes from the Great Cave Offensive. Does it improve on that? Not really. Now, to be fair, some of the treasures are genuine improvements, or are at worst fine. There's vitality capsules that increase Kirby's health by 1 bar, of which there are 4 in game. The maps you get to genuinely improve the map. Notes and sounds can be unlocked, which will unlock stuff for the music player. Speaking of which, there are a total of 6 notes and 4 sounds, and you can even unlock the sound player itself, can be found in treasure chests. There's also the spray paint, which I've talked about before, which changes Kirby's color. Overall, these are fine if purely cosmetic or, superficial stuff. But most of the treasure you find is not even that. It's just food. Can you imagine if you went into a secret area of Aquaria or, say, Metroid, and you activate like a Chozo statue or whatever, and instead of getting a upgrade, you just got a basic health pickup? That would just be so horrible. It would make you feel like you wasted your time. And frankly, that's what it feels like a lot of times. You really feel like you're wasting time when you 100% complete this game. And I can empathize with the creators of this game, as Kirby's movement abilities are, a bit unstandard, and they sort of get in the way of Metroidvania abilities like, say, the hook shot, or double jump. I mean, why do you need that if Kirby can just fly? But even something like the Great Cave Offensive, with, treasures not really doing anything, but actually being just, JPEGs, was better than this. I mean, maybe you could have just done something similar to that for like the filler treasures and just had a little bit of a lore blurb, but honestly, I just think it would have been better than this. Like, you somehow did a step back from the Great Cave Offensive, which I'm amazed you were able to do that. It's so bad. So overall, what are my thoughts? Well, I found this to be an okay Kirby game that unfortunately held down by trying to be a Metroidvania, specifically in a very halfway manner that makes it so that it's not really good at doing either. Not that think that this is necessarily a bad game, and it is, in my opinion, slightly better than the Great Cave Offensive in some manners, but also worse in others. I hope that they consider revisiting this, concept at some point, but given how old this game is, I doubt that will ever happen. I think you should try it at least once, but more than any other Kirby game I've talked about, especially the mainline ones, don't feel like you have to 100% it, as it's really not worth it. Plus, you can play it in many ways. There's obviously the Game Boy Advance original release, there's the Virtual Console for the 3DS, Ambassador Program released first in December 15, 2011 in Australia, then December 16, 2011 in the EU, US, and Japan. Then there was the Wii U Virtual Console release on April 3rd in Japan, and then April 10th, 2014 in the US, and most recently in September 29th, 2023 in Japan, North America, Australia, and EU. Was it released for the Switch, online service. Anyway, I'm the Dark Master, and if you like this video, like it, but if you loved it, consider subscribing, and join me next time on my video game reviews. Take care and have a wonderful day.